I'm Minnie, your favorite Gemini from New York. I lived in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Boston in my 20s, now having a high-paying corporate job in multinational companies and an MBA from MIT Sloan. For the past decade, I've chased career highs, rebuilt my life over and over again, and found fulfillment in some of the world's largest, busiest, and most expensive cities. And in today's video, I'm going to break down how to build a successful and fulfilling life in a big city, and whether you are currently living the life or on the outside looking in, this one is for you. And here are the 5 tips that have really worked for me. First thing first, maximize your income. It is true that you could just move to one of these cities and then believe that with hard work and hustling and all of the things that you do, you can make a great life out of it. As someone who has lived in New York at the age of 18 and again at the age of 30, I can tell you the difference is vast. So my personal recommendation is that before you decide to move to these cities, always try to land a job that is going to give you that financial cushion. So if you're thinking about moving to one of these big cities, the #1 industry and career path that you should be considering is finance. If we're talking about money, go where the money is. Just as a reference, the base pay for post-MBA investment banker roles in New York City is $175,000. That does not include bonuses and other forms of comps. The total package that you take home is easily $250,000 to $300,000 after business school. And you can expect that number to be plus minus 10% in Singapore and Hong Kong as well. Both are financial hubs in Asia. And just something to consider when it comes to pure financial calculation, the tax rate in Singapore and Hong Kong are significantly lower, pretty much capped at 15 to 20%. And you can check out my previous videos on tax implications in these cities. And even if you don't get into an investment banking role or are relatively junior in your career in your 20s, there are many other roles within finance that could give you that leverage and that financial cushion. If you still want to work in a bank, there's always middle office and back office roles, and you also have options in the buy side, asset management, wealth management, venture capital, and many other roles that you can explore in all of these big cities. Now with AI supercharging the industry, there are tons of fintech opportunities as well if you're interested in the intersection of finance and tech. Or if you're like me, who's always interested in the power of data, media, and information and news, there are also strong contenders like Bloomberg bias that you can consider. And having lived it myself, I can tell you that it gives you enough cushion to live a comfortable life in your 20s. And then you have tech, especially big tech. Job security aside these days, with all the layoffs that are still happening, the pure financial gains and salary from these big tech companies are still very promising. By now, there are so many interviews and YouTube videos made by these ex-software engineers or tech workers who were earning $300,000 to $400,000 a year as a 23, 24, 25-year-old. Honestly, that is money that I wouldn't have dreamed of when I was that age. All that is to say, with all the potential trade-offs and prices that we're not going to talk about today, these roles are going to get you that financial cushion to live a good life in a big city. Finally, consulting, your MBB, which is McKinsey, BCG, and Bain, classic post-MBA career path. The reason being, the financial reward is very lucrative. The average base pay of consultants after business school is also in the $200K range. Then on top of that, you will have about $30,000 to $40,000 of signing bonuses, as well as your year-end bonuses that will make the entire package easily over $300,000. If you're straight out of college, it's going to be a lot lower, but it's still very comparable to other industries and other types of jobs. If you want to move to these cities, start building on your career, and have fulfillment in the long term, you gotta have some financial stability first. Being in these industries and these jobs, at least for a couple of years, is going to give you that foundation that allows you to explore what you truly want to do and discovering what else that might bring you fulfillment. And number 2, budget for life, but also for fun. This might get very personal, but to me, a lot of people are getting this wrong. They either over-restrict and become miserable, or they overspend and splurge and wonder where the money went. I think there is a way to build wealth while enjoying your life. So now that you've maximized your income, it's time to think about the outflow of your money and your expenses. So the biggest piece for most people who are moving to big cities on your own or with a partner, you've got to figure out your rent. And generally, rule of thumb that I learned even in my 20s is that you should budget a third of your monthly salary, if you have a stable salary and income, to your rent or mortgage. And the important nuance here is that you should be thinking about that figure in after-tax salary. And there is banking and saving. Before we get into all of the complex investment strategy, simplest way of building your wealth is #1, start a high-yield savings account. And here are some great choices for New York, for Hong Kong, and for Singapore. And on average, these accounts will give you 4 to 5% in interest return, which is so much more significant than what the banks would offer you as the baseline. Again, general rule of thumb, especially if you live in a big city, you should have at least 6 to 12 months worth of emergency fund in this account. And that is calculated with your base rent as well as your expenses needed for every month times 6, 8, 9, 12 months. And that is something that I wish I knew earlier in my career, which would have compounded in the past 10 years. And now the third piece is to take advantage of the retirement scheme either of the government or of your company. This is your 401k and Roth IRA accounts and so on in the US, CPF or Central Provident Fund in Singapore, as well as the MPF or Mandatory Provident Fund in Hong Kong. I took full advantage of the retirement benefits when I was working in corporate. And in Hong Kong and Singapore, both of these schemes have a mandatory portion and a voluntary portion that you would contribute every month into in your retirement account. Your company would match that contribution, either 100%, 75%, 50%, depending on the amount. And to me, when I first learned about the CPF in Singapore, my first reaction was, this is free money that someone is giving me on top of my salary. Why not maxing it out? Since the age of 23, I've been contributing, maximizing these retirement contributions on my end and on my company's end, and it's been 10 years. And as I've mentioned in my previous videos before, this is a big reason why I was able to fund my MIT Sloan MBA at the age of 28. And I will say, as someone who's moved around all the time in true Gemini fashion, the only risk of maximizing these contributions is if you leave the place permanently. When I left Singapore, which I think is a permanent move at the time, I had to do an early withdrawal of my retirement fund, which had a 22% tax penalty. But I did the math. It basically broke even of what I was able to gain in those years, and I was okay to take the financial hit. Now you get into the true budgeting for fun. Remember to automate everything. Credit card bills, utility bills, rental bills, all of that. And then finally, you've essentially set up this great system that's working in the background for you in building wealth and generating savings. You will be able to see your disposable income now after tax, after rent, and after all of these savings and investments. That is the pool that you can play with. And look, in your 20s, I think you should totally spend the money in discovering yourself, knowing what you like, trying out new hobbies, meeting new people, and it's okay if you make a mistake. And my only advice is to be intentional about that pool of disposable income that you have. Whether you love traveling, like I do, or you just want to invest all your money in building out an expensive hobby like golfing or skiing, you should plan out the trips and expenses at the beginning of the year so that you're intentional about where you're spending the money. If you're the type who need to track exactly where you're spending the money, great, but I can tell you that I am not someone who actually gives myself a budget every month as to where I should spend it and how I should spend it. And number 3, find your anchor. And this is something that I absolutely did not think about in my 20s, moving through these most expensive cities. And in hindsight, I wish I were a little more introspective when it comes to reflecting on what my anchor is and be more in touch with my emotions at that age. But at the time, I was so focused on my career, my social circle, my goals, and my wellness in separation. There were definitely moments where I look at my life in all of these categories and felt like this feeling of dissatisfaction and lack of fulfillment, even though on paper, everything seems fine. And this is where finding your anchor becomes extremely important, and that is so different for everyone. And right now, after a decade of moving and rebuilding my life in these big and expensive cities, to me, the one anchor that will help me get through a lot of the hardships and difficult moments is actually community, or at least a group of people that I can lean on and I can reach out to for the best times to the worst times of my life. On the contrary, for my partner, his anchor is having a great home. And that is the physical space that makes him feel cozy, feel secure, and feel at ease. For some other people, the anchor comes from a specific activity. I've known people who thrive in big cities who is so into this one thing, which could be a sport or a specific hobby. And what does it take to experiment? You've got to maximize your income so you have the financial cushion and disposable income to do it. And you've got to manage your budget well so that you're not stressing out about your necessity. Number 4, building your fire exit. Finding a fire exit is about getting out of the city and do something or find something that rejuvenates and recharges you. Trust me, every city has its warning signs and its escape routes. Before you figure out the fire exit is actually to know when there is a fire. And that goes back to my earlier point about being extremely in touch with your emotions and mental well-being. For some people, it is very introspective and internal, from journaling to meditation to anything that helps you stay in touch with yourself. But for others, it is external. It is speaking with friends, it is going to therapists, it is getting help from coaches and seeking external feedback to know how you're feeling and how you're doing. And personally, for me, the really alerting sign is my motivation and productivity level. The moment I catch myself having unmotivated and negative thoughts, that's when I know I probably need an escape. In the past 3 years, my husband and I have gone upstate to explore some of the smaller towns and excursions around New York City. Our most recent trip was to Otter Camp Catskill. It is 2 hours drive away, and there are many similar campsites in little cabins like this that you could take advantage of. Financial cushion, one more time. And for Hong Kong, if you haven't been in your mind like this, that, or that, reality, you also have all of these beautiful hiking trails in nature that you can explore. A lot of expats have been going to China, especially Shenzhen, which is the city adjacent to Hong Kong, have their day trips and enjoy these ridiculously cheap but fun spa excursions and massages and these wellness treatments. And in Singapore, between an hour and 2 hours, you could fly to Bali, you could fly to Phuket, you could fly to Cebu, some of the most beautiful beaches in the whole world. Flights can cost under $100 US. And with that tax bracket, you could totally afford it. And part 5 and final piece of advice is you should check in with your city once a year, like a relationship. This is probably the most important and underrated habit that I built in my 20s to help me get through each of the cities that I lived in. So treat yourself like a life partner, and every year, year-end, sit down with your city and ask the question, how are we doing? And this is a reflection essentially with yourself, but also in the context of the city that you live in, to assess how you're doing in finance, in your career, in your friendships and relationships, in your love life, in your health, as well as personal growth. These are all important areas that will contribute not only to your success, but also your fulfillment living in a big city. And a lot of these things are driven and determined by the city that you live in. I think evaluating your satisfaction and room for improvement in these areas in the context of your city is critical. And good news for you. I created a free template that you can download and use to assess your relationship with your big city. Link in the description below. Let me know what you think. I actually think you could probably use this with your actual life partner as well. And I left Singapore when I was 25 because I did this check-in. Things just weren't working for me anymore with me and the city. I didn't love my job at the time. I felt stale. A lot of the friendships that I built were moving on. I didn't see a lot of opportunities for me to grow in the fields that I was excited about. And I just wasn't really excited about living in the city anymore. And of course, like a real life partnership, you gotta ask the question, can we work this out, or is this it? There can be huge costs associated with moving. So you should treat it as a serious process where you try to fix your problems, communicate your problems, identify solutions, test them out before you decide that you are going to get out. Remember, these big cities will take everything you give them, but the real question is whether you're getting something worthy in return. And I hope that this video is helpful if you're struggling with fulfillment living in big cities or are trying to find opportunities in cities but aren't sure if you should pursue it. I genuinely believe that everyone can build success and find fulfillment in the city that they live in. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.